First and foremost, I want to thank the organizers of the conference for setting up this hybrid meeting. A special thanks goes to Pauline and Adrien for setting up this very interesting session on disappearing African pottery traditions. My contribution is devoted to the earliest pottery in the Western Congo Basin, which comes out of nowhere but also seems to vanish into thin air. But first, I want to give you a bit of a general background why this is important. The spread of pottery-producing communities throughout Central Africa is regulated by the so-called Bantu Expansion. Only a few days ago, a new paper was published claiming that Bantu languages expanded through the rainforest. The study draws its conclusions by analyzing modern language data. But as these data do not entail historical facts, the authors follow an earlier approach in that they help themselves by filling up their knowledge gaps with archaeological data. But those archaeological data have nothing to do with the languages under investigation by the authors. The authors also simply assume a connection between these archaeological data and the modern communities that live in each region today. This raises the issue of continuity within the archaeological record, which I will highlight next. Last year, we published a study shedding additional light on the already proposed setback in human activity in Central Africa between the early and late Iron Age. We show that the Bantu expansion cannot be reconstructed as a single migratory event. Two periods of more intense human activity, each consisting of an expansion and regeneration phase, are separated by a widespread setback, which we interpret as a population collapse. In the top graph, you can see the temporal variation in the activity of ancient pottery-producing communities over the past 3,000 years. The empirical sum probability distribution, the black line, already shows a distinct bimodal pattern. To constrain the timing of these periods, we compared the observed SPD with 4 different models of hypothetical population growth. This allowed delineation of 4 successive periods during which the observed SPD either exceeds or falls short of the population growth trends predicted by the models, the blue and red shading respectively. The logistic growth model, shown here the gray envelope, is probably most pertinent in the context of the Bantu expansion, which is often presented as a large-scale and exceptionally rapid process followed by a continuous presence of Bantu-speaking people after the initial expansion. Below, you can see the frequency of contemporaneous sites modeled for each known pottery style using a Gaussian normal distribution. This graph shows a similar trend. A surge in the number of sites in the second half of the first millennium BCE that led to a stagnation phase, which is followed by a decline. The number of sites only increases after 1000 CE again. On the bottom graph, the same pattern can be observed when viewing the number of pottery styles through time. But this broader study that underlines the inaccuracies in simple historical projections as the ones seen earlier also brings up the question of what happened to the communities after the 5th to 6th century CE. Main source of information on the material culture of the communities living in Central Africa for the past 2,500 years are ceramic finds. The setback in human activity that I have demonstrated to you shows itself as a hiatus within the sequence of pottery styles in the Congo Basin, seen on the left here. Each bar represents a temporal distribution of a pottery style. Between 400 and 600 CE, all traditions comprised of multiple subsequent pottery styles end. This process is also discernible in the time-sliced maps on the right. Starting with the important Mbonga style in the inner Congo Basin, an expansion can be observed, followed by a considerable decline of sites with pottery finds and a nearly blank map between 600 and 1000 CE. But the focal point of this talk will be the Pikunda-Munda style, the earliest pottery to be found in the Western Congo Basin. Pikunda-Munda style was first described by Manfred Eggert in 1992, following being discovered during fieldwork in 1987. One of the 24 pottery styles that I described in detail in my recently published PhD thesis on the archaeology of the northwestern Congo Basin. In that, I studied inventories of 122 sites in an area of about 500 to 600 kilometers. But now I want to focus on the Pikunda-Munda style. It is the main pottery style pertaining to the early Iron Age in the western parts of the Congo Basin. It is found in an area of about 300 to 150 kilometers along the rivers Sangha and Likwala-Ozeb. The main characteristic of the Pikunda-Munda pottery are its wide, open-mouthed bowls with approximately parallel sides, flared rims, and rounded bases. The general ornament scheme is based on linear elements produced by means of incision and grooving. Rocker stamp decoration is occasionally present. In that respect, it shows similarities to the contemporaneous groups in the inner Congo Basin. The present information point towards the interpretation that the Pikunda-Munda rather a maybe more distant substream of the Equator Coast style tradition than an independent entity. What is remarkable is that this style has no known predecessors, but its characteristics also vanish from the region. All subsequent pottery styles found within the distribution area of the Pikunda-Munda style have its origin either in the Equator Coast tradition of the inner Congo Basin or the Ngoko tradition entering from southeast Cameroon. Style can be best described based on features excavated in 1987 at the eponymous site Pikunda on the Middle Sangha River. An excavation yielded two pit features, one of which dated into the 4th century BCE to the 3rd century CE, while the second one was considerably younger. Both inventories are internally homogeneous, but in all aspects different when compared to each other. As an example, the older pottery is made out of river clays rich in sponge spiggles, while the younger material was made from a different clay source. This shows me that the communities producing the younger Mandon pottery have no connection with the older potters of the Pikunda-Munda phase. Their entire chaîne opératoire is different. It is only recently that I started reconstructing the chaîne opératoire of these ceramics. My main focus now lies in deducing primary and secondary shaping techniques, both being central aspects in reconstructing chaîne opératoires. This is the first overview of these shaping techniques through time and separated by region. At the start of my current project, only research by Alexandre Livingston-Smith on the eastern Congo Basin yielded data on shaping techniques. Marked, you can see the Pikunda-Munda group dating into the early Iron Age. Primary shaping technique in that group is unanimously the drawing of a ring technique. The macro traces pointing at this are omnipresent diagonal fissures and cracks, as well as finely and wall parallel layering in the breaks. In some cases, vessel also shows singular vertical fissures, indicating the join of a ring. This indicates that the ring was not shaped by piercing of a cone, like the modern potters in Ikenga and the Ruki do, but by forming a ring from an initial big coil. There seems to be some variation in terms of how the bases are joined. Some vessels show that the base must have been shaped separately and fitted over the upper part, but there are equally strong cases in which the bases seem to be simply plugged. Comparing what we know from the Pikunda-Munda group to the oldest ceramics from the adjacent inner Congo Basin, one sees that the vessels of the Mbonga phase, like this one from Bosso and Jaffo on the Lulonga River, show similar diagonal and spiral cracks and fissures. These traces also point towards a primary shaping using a drawing technique. As I found no indications of plugged or fitted bases, it seems that these vessels were produced relying on the drawing of a lump technique though. But I only checked the material from the inner Congo Basin 2 weeks ago, so these findings have to be marked as really preliminary. In general, it is striking that the shaping techniques are similar and different at the same time. To close this off, I want to compare the Pikunda-Munda style to the younger phases in the western Congo Basin. As said earlier, all younger pottery groups show clear stylistic indications of strong connections to the inner Congo Basin. Thus, it is likely that they were offshoots of the Equator Coast tradition as described by Hans-Peter Wotzka. In terms of shaping techniques, while on the lower Liquala-Oserbe River, drawing of a lump technique was observed in 1987 by Manfred Eggert, Leopold Mbika Ngoma reported that potters upstream at Ipena produced vessels by coiling. Where the photos in his study have not been well reproduced, I found certain differences in the macro traces of the ceramics from the two parts of the river. The production on the lower part of the river, here seen on the left, is connected to the Abamba style and clearly shows traces of the drawing from a lump technique, vertical or diagonal fissures or cracks, and a lot of tool marks on the interior of the bases. The ceramics upstream near Ipena, here examples seen on the upper right, show quite different traces. Breaks are predominantly horizontal and vessels often show compressing folds. Summarizing, Pikunda-Munda, the earliest ceramic group that is found in the Western Congo Basin, dates between the 2nd century BCE to the 6th century CE. It is not the first pottery in the Congo Basin. This is the Mbonga group found further east that is at least some 200 years older. Pikunda-Munda pottery shares certain characteristics with the pottery of the inner Congo Basin, mainly the usage of river clays, rich in sponge spickles that have been used without addition of any temper agents, as well as certain preferences regarding decorational elements. But in terms of vessel shapes, it sets apart. Also, it's the only pottery in the Congo Basin in that time with round bases. Its characteristics vanish after the 5th to 6th century CE, and they leave no trace in any other pottery nearby. This research, while still in its infancies, already shows that the focus on stylistic changes seen within the archaeological research of the region is only scratching the surface. Vessel morphology and decorations only depict changes in fashion trends, while the detailed technical analysis shown here enables to reconstruct the decisions made by potters that tie together communities of practice. This also brings me back to the initial slide with the recent paper reconstructing an expansion through the rainforest based on modern languages. It seems clear to me that the proposed expansion cannot be brought in harmony with the finding that the earliest widespread pottery group in the Western Congo Basin, the region from which communities are supposed to have settled all parts further west, south, and east, disappeared and does not constitute any tradition itself. I hope that this excursion into the archaeology of the rainforest of the Congo Basin showed you an example for an abandonment of potter's crafts about 1,500 years ago. I'm looking forward to the other papers in this session, especially on potential causes of disappearances of such a loss of know-how or changes in fashion taste. As of now, demographic changes are my best bet for the cause of the disappearances of the Pikunda-Munda style. Thank you very much.